Episode 434, Mirin Fader on Notebooks, Finding the Breakthrough, Biography in Dream. Atop the show, I want to thank Dave Flaws for upping his Patreon membership. And if you want to support the show and get some face-to-face time with me to talk some things out, because sometimes it's just what you need to do, visit patreon.com/CNFpod.
More is really the key to our job. It's getting more, asking the next question, getting another detail, more into it.
Oh, hey, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to badass people about telling true stories, be it narrative journalism, essays, memoirs, documentary film, podcast. We do it all. I'm Brendan O'Mara. Welcome. By all means, put your feet up on the coffee table. I'm no monster. Mirin Fader returns with her new book. Second book, Dream. The Life and Legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon. It's published by Hachette Books. Mirin also is the author of the best-selling biography, Giannis, The Improbable Rise of an NBA Champion. Mirin is one of my favorite writers, and what a joy to have her back on the podcast. Always nice. We love those return guests. It's very validating. Dream is a fine biography that traces the arc of a pioneering figure in the NBA and the personal transformation he undergoes when he decides to embrace the core ethos of Islam, how he turned from a materialistic hothead to a source of calm for the Houston Rockets and really the world that benefits from his philanthropy. He and the Rockets won back-to-back NBA titles during the Michael Jordan exodus from the league in the mid-90s. Hakeem also fundamentally changed what it meant to be a big man in the NBA, nimble as a guard, but as tall as a telephone pole. He's a private figure, so Mirin speaks about how she navigated the reporting of this book when the central figure wasn't directly cooperative. He was, as Mirin shares, indirectly cooperative. Not all biographers are so lucky. The road is littered with biographies who have to circumvent the machine in and around their main characters, be it Bo Jackson or Ricky Henderson, and myriad others. Show notes to this episode and more at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, there you can sign up for the up to 11 monthly Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. We're dealing with book recommendations, cool links to cool stuff. Lots of things that I think will bring inspiration to you and your work, and that's what we're all about here. Mirin Fader is a staff writer for The Ringer, where she specializes in long profiles. I mean, that's the dream right there. That's your gig. Long profiles and features. Dream is apropos. She spent a good deal of time at Bleacher Report and the Orange County Register. Her work has been anthologized in Year's Best Sports Writing, and she also appears in the late Matt Tullis's collection of interviews, Stories Can Save Us. And what makes for a great writer is being an even better reporter. And that's what Mirin is. And I think you're really going to dig this CNFers. At the end of the show, parting shot is a Janet Malcolm-esque parting shot. If you know, you know. And it's inspired by me thinking I had offended Mirin at one point during this conversation. We cleared it up. Turns out I didn't, but I really felt like I did. Anyway, big relief on my part. Okay, here's Mirin Fader. Riff. I think a fun jumping off point would be, I just caught a video on YouTube of James Hetfield, lead singer and guitarist of my favorite band, and he's just talking about his guitars and it just what he likes of his guitars, ones he uses for certain songs versus others. And I was like, what would be the equivalent in the writing world of kind of tools that we use? And the first thing that came to mind was really notebooks and what kind of notebooks we like. And I was wondering, for you, I love geeking out on notebooks. So what's your go-to notebook? And how do you effectively use it as a tool in your repertorial arsenal?
Yeah, I have this. It's right next to me. It's the standard red steno book. I got like a million of them off of Amazon, I'm ashamed to say. But I am team write things down. Like I still have a paper planner, which totally my friends make fun of me all the time because I'll be like, I don't know if I can make it. I'll let you know when I have my planner at home. Like, I'll go check. It's just like, what is wrong with you? So, for me, the notebooks, I just think of random things. Like when I'm at the gym, I'm like, oh, I should have led with this. Or like, maybe we can circle back to that motif at the end, and I'll just write it in my notebook. So wherever I go, I always have this notebook. And I don't know why it just has to be the red one. I think it's because like when I started my career at the Orange County Register, those were the ones they had. And I met one of my best friends when she showed me the supplies closet. Like she opened it and it was like you could kind of hear the like the heaven, and so now I'm obsessed.
I know the feeling, and it's what I think my favorite one. I like the steno size, the 6x9, and I really like the field notes one, mainly because the chipboard on either side is very, very sturdy, almost as sturdy as a clipboard. And I really like that degree of sturdiness. And, it's good enough size. It's bigger than your classic reporter notebook, but it's got okay paper. But I love that chipboard. And that's really important when you're out in the field. If you're lucky enough to do face-to-face stuff and actually get out in the world and get out from behind the desk.
Right, right. Oh my God. Yeah. The things I have to have the blue pens. I don't really like black pens. I mean, I have both, but I have red as well. But something about the blue pen, I don't know. We have these stupid idiosyncrasies about us.
Mm-hmm. Well, idiosyncrasies are so cool to unpack and very fun to talk about because so much of this game is mental, and you just need those things to click into place to make you feel the part, look the part. And I imagine how do those help you, feel the part so you can turn yourself loose?
Well, number one, it makes the person, because my work involves, interviewing people, it makes the person that's sitting across from me less anxious because there's not, 4 cameramen and there's not all this gear. It's like so simple. There's literally me, my notebook, and recorder. It just allows us to really have a conversation instead of feeling like, oh, it's a capital I interview and we've got to set up an hour before. And, it's just so simple. We're just talking. And personally, when you're interviewing somebody, it's so hard to listen to what they're saying, come up with the next question, process it all at the same time. What is their face looking like? Writing down observations, not just about their face and how they're saying things, but setting. Is there something happening in the setting? Oh, let's note the timestamp that they started to cry, or there's just so many things going on. And I feel like, I guess, yeah, it's my emotional support notebook.
And you're alluding to it already, but how do you navigate and balance the recorder versus the notebook?
I need to be present, and so neither one can really hold my attention. So I am sparse with my writing. I like to show up like 30 minutes before an interview and just write down everything I see and feel and hear. So the bulk of the writing is actually done before the interview, and then after I'll do a free write. But during it, I try to be really minimal of like, okay, timestamp this, and then write a keyword like emotional or something, or the background, something in their face, because you don't want them to be nervous. Like I'll notice that if I write something down, they're thinking like, what did I just say that she had to write down? Like, why was that something she wrote down? And really it could be a
Right.
thought that I had about something totally unrelated. They just don't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I often, the timestamp thing is key. And often it's just as they're, in a way, not to interrupt them, the main thing I often write in my notebook will be just like follow-up questions like, I'll write down a word like, oh, that was really cool what they said, and I'll be like, you said a moment ago that this, what did you mean by that? Let's pull on that thread a little longer, because otherwise my brain just gets so full of other stuff that I'll forget those things and be like, God damn it, 3 hours later I'm like, I forgot to follow up on that, and now that moment's gone.
Yeah, the most common word I probably write down in my notebook is more. So maybe like mother talking about their mom, and it's like then they go in a different direction. I'm like, no, I want to go back. So I'll just be like, mom, more, and like that makes sense to no one except for me. But more is really the key to our job. It's getting more, asking the next question, getting another detail, more into it.
Yeah, and that's when I was talking to Seth about that. I brought up the anecdote of Darcy Frey, who, the brilliant author behind The Last Shot. And he, early on in his career, he's like, I'm only using a notebook, no recorder. And so which I kind of wish I could do that, but I just can't.
No, not in this age. You got to record everything.
Yeah, and it's just like, and Seth was just like, that's all good, but like our job, like you said a moment ago, is to really just gather information, and the recorder is capturing, all those things. But like you said, there are these ambient or atmospheric details that you can, or a facial twitch, or like you said, emotional, or more mom. Those are things that you can capture in the notebook. And if our job is to capture information, then we need to use everything at our disposal.
Yeah, my editor said something earlier this year when I was working on a piece about Bronny James at USC. He was like, "You know what your best instrument is? Your eyes and your ears." And I was like, "Oh, like he was like," and I think he said instead of instrument, I actually think he's your best source is your eyes and your ears. And I just thought, wow, like that, I need to start thinking like that.
Also, as you get to the writing and revising part of things, and I'm at this particular point with this biography I'm writing, and I hate the book so much. I cannot look at it any longer, and I truly hate it. And how much did you hate Dream by the end?
This is like such a niche question. I love it so much. Writer to writer, I'm trying to start a support group with you. Okay. Yes, I really did. And it just, I always joke, but I'm dead ass serious when I say, is it even English? Like I'm just reading it and I'm like, I can't even tell anymore. Like, is it good? Is it bad? Like it's just, you're so into it. And it's so hard. And that's what's funny about book promo is you're like, oh, I wrote this like a year ago. I have to like reread my book to remember the anecdotes. And so rereading it has also brought up those feelings. Like I'm not one of those people that likes to reread my work. Like when it's done, it's done. I don't ever want to see it again. That's why when, for months after my first book came out, every time Giannis did something, like 20 people would send me the clip. And I'm like, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to see this. I'm done.
Oh my God, you're gonna get the just like dream shake videos all year long. It's just
All
like,
year
check
long.
this out.
And I'm like, you guys know that I probably saw the clip in my research, right?
Well, you bring up a great point, and this is a question I have right underneath. Like, how much do you hate your book by the end?
I'm not over it. Okay, I'm not over it.
It's how do you even know what you've written is good or bad anymore?
Whew, man. That right there, you don't. So I'm not striving for good anymore. Is it accurate? Is it truthful? Is it deeply reported? Did I do everything? Did I make every last call? Did I give literally my whole soul into it? Like that is what I think of. Like people like they ask me like, "Oh, what's your favorite story that you've written?" It's such a weird question because I'm like I don't think of it like that. When a story's done, I never think, "Oh, that was so good." I always think it's more like I always think that's so interesting the way it turned out. Like for example, like, "Oh, I thought this image would be so central to it and ended up not even making the final cut." Or like, "Huh, that's so interesting the way that section came together and how we brought these two elements together." It's more like I just keep thinking of those things, but it's never like, oh yeah, that was so good.
We're talking about shaping what surprises you, what might be in, what might be out. But when does the shape of the book or a long article really start to reveal itself to you and come into clearer focus?
It definitely happens differently each time, but sometimes it happens in the middle of an interview in person and you just feel this sense of connectivity with the subject and you're just like, "Oh, I get it now." Like that's what I feel. "Oh, I get it." Like I was at, for Dream, I was at the home of one of his friends, Henry Ibarando, who ended up being like a critical part of the story and really the gut of the story when Hakeem becomes more religious again. It changes his whole life and career. And I was just in this man's house and I was like, this is it. Like, this is what it's about. This is the gut of the book. This is the heart of it. And that's just something you don't get from archives. It's something you don't get from stats. It's something that it's just instinctual. It doesn't mean I know exactly how to do it. I definitely struggled immensely writing that. But I don't know. It's a feeling. But sometimes, I always joke with my mom because I'll be like, this story sucks. No, it's so bad. And she's like, every single time you say this to me, and then you have your breakthrough and you're like, Mom, I had a breakthrough. So The breakthrough comes at different times. Sometimes it doesn't come till way at the end of the game and it's due in 2 days, but the breakthrough does always come. And I'm trying to trust that more. Like, okay, you will figure it out.
Elliptically, as we kind of get into some of the specifics of the book, but I wanted to explore or get a sense of, when your love affair with basketball started.
Oh yeah, I was in 5th grade. I saw all these boys just like running like together to the basketball courts, and like I didn't really even know it was a basketball court. It's like this rectangular shape and there's these two nets, and I'm just like, where are they all going? Why are they all like running? And I don't know. It was just an instinct. I was like, well, I want to see what's up, and so I ran with them, and it was just an out of body experience. Like I just picked up the ball and I just was like dribbling and shooting. I was like, I love this. I need this. Like this is what I want to do with my life. And I don't know how at 10 years old I knew that, but I really knew that in my heart. And it really was love at first sight. And I spent the next 10 years like really, I wanted to be in the WNBA. I played my first year in college. I went through a lot of injuries, but basketball has always been such a huge part of my life.
With Hakeem, what was it about him that really started to appeal to you?
I felt like he is somebody that we know nothing about, and he's one of the greatest of all time players that is sort of forgotten, and a pioneer whose story just really hasn't been told. And because I love human interest stories, I knew the broad strokes of his story, right? The return to Islam, but nobody had really ever looked into why he needed to return to Islam, why he left it behind, how it changed him. And I just thought there's so many layers to this man, and he would be such a compelling subject. I also just didn't feel like he received enough credit for the body of work that he did. He's just left out of conversations these days. And I tend to pick subjects that are humble and hardworking and driven, and he fits that bill, very similar to Giannis. And finally, the Giannis book really was not just about Giannis's life story, but about the current landscape of international players, and how it's changed. And I thought, well, who was the one that paved the way for the Giannis's and the Joel Embiids of the world? And I was like, it's Dream. Like it's almost like the prequel to Giannis. He's the one that paved the way. The way African players dominate in the NBA right now, it all traces back to him, and nobody's ever made that connection. And so I really wanted to make that connection.
Yeah, and I think your book does an exceptionally good job of examining or interrogating why, just the American lens often neglects or discounts the foreign players, and specifically players that did come from the African continent, and the African continent being the key phrasing of it, because there's 50 some odd countries on the African continent, and it often gets just brushed with as if it's a monolith. And I think your book does a wonderful job of like really contextualizing the continent and the contributions African players have made to their continent, but also to the NBA through the 80s and up through today.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah, in trying to discover more about how Hakeem was a trailblazer, I learned that there were so many before him that blazed the trail for him, and these are names that are just so unknown to most American audiences, from Yomi Sangodeyi to Dude Tongal and Ed Bona. I wanted this book to give respect and flowers to so many that even came before him and paved the way. The way to understand the present is to look to the past. And I wanted it to almost be like a mini book throughout of like the history of the NBA's efforts in Africa, and then how people like Hakeem, like Dikembe Mutombo, really influenced an entire generation of people and growth of basketball over the continent. And finally, like, so much of Hakeem's story has been misunderstood in the sense of it's never talked about, the racism that he experienced in college, in the pros, the misunderstandings people had about him coming from Lagos. And so it was just really important to talk about that, because the only thing you hear about him in his college years is Phi Slamma Jamma, the amazing team he was part of. But you never hear about all the way the press characterized him. A biography is not just about a person, it's also about eras. It's really about time, environment.
You talk about that when he's in Houston, and then the way he's covered. A lot of reporters treated him as this, very simplistic foreigner. It was like, well, he grew up speaking English.
Right.
He had an accent, but it's just like, it's not like he was, just piecing together just odd words and using hand signals to make his point clear. Like he was totally fluent in English, and yet he was characterized as almost simplistic.
Yeah, exactly. And beyond that, that he was incapable of speaking English. Like a rumor was Guy Lewis didn't make him available to the press because he didn't speak English. And that really made things worse and worse. Even though Guy Lewis was just trying to shield him from publicity, it just furthered this awful, disgusting narrative that he was other. One of the most interesting things I found was going through the archives of the student newspaper, the Daily Cougar of the university. And Hakeem actually wrote a firsthand column for the paper about what it was like to be so misunderstood and how he was, his star was rising, but people still had these assumptions that he was, quote, dumb and, quote, didn't understand things. And it really upset him. And it was so important to show that side of him and that firsthand account, because like I said, it's just never talked about.
Just for you, as you were starting to unpack his life, what was the experience like? Just re-examining his life right from the start.
Well, I, first of all, was so grateful that so many people were still alive. His coaches from Lagos are in their 80s. And with the help of a Nigerian journalist named Femi Adefeso, who's now become a great friend and support, I was able to interview the coaches and the teammates. And that to me was so exciting because obviously I've read every single thing ever done on him, and his coaches and teammates have never been interviewed before for an American publication. So that was critical. The other thing was trying to figure out the origin story of how does he even come to America? Like, it's this 2-sentence story of like, Hakeem was playing in Lagos, and then all of a sudden, this white guy named Chris Pond scouts him, takes him to America, supposed to go to St. John's. Ooh, it's too cold. He makes a split decision in the airport to actually go to Houston. Weather determines the course of history. How crazy and dreamlike is this story? And now Houston's a powerhouse. Sounds great, but it really isn't true. And it was fascinating for me to go on that journey. I did my first FOIA request as a journalist, capital J journalist. Really enjoyed that, trying to learn more. But the more I learned, the more I was like, wow, so none of it's true. St. John's actually didn't recruit him, wasn't expecting him. The myth is just that. It's a myth. So it was also quite exciting to get into that myth.
And what effect did team handball have on Hakeem's development?
It had a huge effect, and handball is incredibly competitive. The court vision that he had to just see above the people he was playing against is almost like, a big point guard in the NBA. And so he started that agility, that quickness, that court vision playing handball. And you had to make a split decision with the ball in like 3 seconds. So there was always this like court awareness and spatial awareness and nimbleness. Is that a word? Nimbleness on his feet. Agility. That is the word. I promise I've had enough cold brew today. And it really helped him. And the funny thing is that he kept turning down the basketball coaches who were saying, like, you need to play basketball. That's your sport, not handball. And he's like, no, I like handball. And he just kept turning these basketball coaches down over and over and over until he finally relented and was like, all right, I'll play both. So for a while, he was doing both sports. He would leave the basketball court with a little, minutes left in the game to go to the handball game, which was like a short distance away. And so he was toggling between the two courts, staying in 2 different dorms for 2 different sports at competitions, which I thought was incredible.
Early in the book, you write that his story is a powerful meditation on transformation and growth. So in what ways did his life fit into that arc?
First, I think there's athletic transformation. He was not, quote, a dream when he first started out playing basketball. He was not skilled. He did not have an offensive repertoire for a good 4 years. So he worked and he worked and he transformed himself from this, inexperienced late bloomer that started at age 17, which is crazy, and then becomes one of the nation's top shot blockers a year later, also crazy, to one of the most delicate, fantastic offensive players of our time and defense. So there's first is the athletic transformation. The second, most importantly, the spiritual transformation. This is a person who grew up religious, abandoned it for over a decade, and then reconnected with his faith. The spiritual transformation and introspection not only changed him as a human being, helped with his temper, all of these things that were holding him back, but it allowed the Rockets to finally break through and win 2 championships. And then finally, I think the third transformation is just geographic. His story, it so dovetails with the NBA's expansion into Africa and basketball becoming a global sport and spreading. And he was really a catalyst for that. And so we chart how, the league transformed itself. He transformed into an ambassador of sorts for the game, and now culminating in there's a professional league in Africa right now.
What was the inflection point that really allowed him to dive back into his faith and have that spiritual reawakening?
I believe it was meeting Henry Barando, the man that I mentioned earlier. Henry is not Muslim, he's Catholic, which I also found really interesting. But it was through talking with him, who represented him as like a partial agent slash lawyer, about the deeper feelings he was feeling, this emptiness, this spiritual emptiness, this feeling of being materially successful but not personally satisfied. And they would sit and read this book together in Henry's home, called Happiness is an Inside Job. They would ask deep questions of each other, like, who do you want to be? What do you see yourself doing? Are you happy with yourself? And according to Henry, like, these were the first time that Hakeem was really dealing with these questions of inner worth, and where does success come from, and where does happiness come from. And he started to kind of divorce himself from material things and devote his life to God. And I don't know if it would have happened if he didn't meet Henry.
What ends up being the challenge in writing a book of this nature when the central figure really doesn't care for attention?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And it's like you respect it so much, right? Like this, he is a there's a reason why nothing has been done on him. But actually, it just really forces you to continue to do the reporting you normally would do, which is call 100, 200, 300 people. And I ended up, I believe, getting 260 or over 260 people. I think that is part of the story. The reticence to be in the limelight is what makes him so interesting and so worthy of this type of treatment. He deserves this story, whether he wants to or not. His story matters, and it's sad to me that the younger generations don't really know about him. And so I actually really enjoyed talking with those people closest to him to find out more. I think I admire a superstar that doesn't see themselves as a superstar. And that to me leads to a much richer narrative.
And did you end up having access to him, or did he divorce himself from it just for because he didn't like the limelight?
Well, because of the limelight and also just religious reasons and the way that he is a private person, he didn't want to participate, but he was very helpful. And he, allowed me to go to his mosque and meet with and interview his director and gave me contacts for his friends. And so he ended up being very helpful.
So how do you handle conversations and lobby a central figure like him that you want to, write a book about him? And what are those conversations like to at least get him on your side?
Well, it was a lot of, I know that credit is something that you don't value and it's not important to you, and you don't like the limelight, but I think your story matters, and I think you've inspired a generation, and I just think it's time for younger generations to know that story. And Henry's son is actually the one that really lobbied and spent hours talking with Hakeem on my behalf. Very kind man himself, saying, she really wants to do this story justice. And Henry's son was very helpful in bridging that connection. you know there's not the perfect words. It's hard. Again, it's like if somebody just wants to live a private life and stay out of the limelight, there's not much you can say. But I really just tried to focus on the fact that I wanted to talk about that humility. I wanted to show that that is part of it, that you can achieve a lot and stay out of the limelight. You can be massively successful and not be boastful. And that those were things that I would highlight in the book, which I did.
And when you're writing a sports biography, it can be very difficult to make it more than rote, just game stuff and highlights and all that stuff. It can get awfully predictable if you're in the wrong hands. It can just feel like, another game, another race, this,
Right.
that, and the other. So, for you, how are you? You need some of that to some extent. Any sports writer or sports reader is going to crave that on some level. But how do you try to get beyond that and use whatever game tape there is to inform the story and not lean on that stuff too much?
Yeah, it's hard because I feel like I'm trying to satisfy two audiences. There's like the diehard sports fans that like live for the game log and the play by play and like the one move over David Robinson. And then there's my other core audience, the NPR people that like do not care at all. And what I learned from my first book is you just cannot satisfy either one fully. Like that there are some that are going to gloss right over the David Robinson couple pages and some that are going to be like, oh my God, I was 7 years old and I saw it myself and it was bamboozled and he was so great. So, it's just, I try to put enough in it, but I also know that like, that isn't what I personally find the most interesting and what I want to focus on. So you try to balance it with more reporting about other things. Like to me, the most moving part of the first title with the Rockets was not necessarily a play, but that he goes to the mosque right after instead of going out and celebrating with his teammates. I thought that's just such an epitome of who he is.
What makes sports and sports writing interesting is the getting to that human element, and then the athletic stuff acts just as seasoning on top of that.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, and I sometimes say, "Oh, I wish I didn't have to put this stat here," but that is important. And in fact, trying to get to the origins of the dream shake, I found that really interesting. And like trying to figure out how refs were like so confused how to ref him because they weren't sure if he was traveling, that's interesting. So I think there's a way to talk about the game or how the Sonics players, confessed to me that they intentionally fouled him because they couldn't stop him and they quote beat the crap out of him. There's a way to talk about the game that's interesting that isn't bogged down in play by play.
And with biography, and this is something I've kind of struggled with and have a hard time articulating this, but sometimes it feels, I guess it applies to journalism in general. Sometimes it feels like inherently exploitative, and you're benefiting by telling someone else's story, and it's just like it just feels, like I say, mildly exploitative. I wonder if like how you reconcile that, or just think about that when doing biography, be it Giannis or Hakeem, and even to feature work. Though feature work doesn't seem as, lack of a better term, insidious. Sometimes the book stuff makes it feel like you're really taking advantage of someone for your own gain. I wonder if that's something you think about.
No, I don't feel that I do that. I'm not even in my work. A lot of journalists put themselves in there and put the I in there and make it all about them. So, yeah, I don't feel that. I think journalism is a public service. It matters. Telling these stories matter, and we all have a right to do that. And it's work. It's very hard work, and from that doing that yourself. So, yeah, I don't feel that way.
Yeah, with my the sister of my main source, she basically told me like to fuck off, and you're just like a leech, just trying to capitalize on my brother. Other sources I've talked to, they ask for money to talk to me because, well, if you're making money on this, why can't we make any money on this? And I was just like, ugh. And so I ran into that frequently, and it got me thinking about this idea of benefiting from it, even though in the end it's like minimum wage. But it's still like, it's this thing that was just on my mind and always just made me, it backed me into a corner that I wasn't comfortable in.
Well, it's the same in journalism. Like, we don't pay our sources. I can't pay you to do an interview for a feature for The Ringer because you're seen as currying favor. So it's the same in books. Like, I
Yeah.
get asked all the time for money, and I'm like, I literally can't. pay you. And so it's the same in long form work. But that isn't really talked about. But yeah, it's the same. Is like you want an unbiased thing, and that's why biographies are so important because it is the unvarnished truth. It is a non-biased account. It isn't a ghost written puff book, and it isn't a co-written puff book. It's the real deal.
And in talking to Ian O'Connor, you talked about like this. We talked about the unauthorized designation for biography and how that's just like that word and that title is such a disservice to the journalism at the heart, because ultimately that's what you want. You want an unauthorized thing that isn't informed by the point of view of the central figure. This way, you're getting it. You're triangulating from hundreds of sources to get to a really good story. And yeah, and to me, that's that's the way to do it. And yeah, to tell these stories in a way that that honors the person at heart. And sometimes there are some unsavory details, but that just to me just rounds out the character.
Most biographies don't get the main person. That's just the common thing. I mean, look at the new Pulitzer Prize winning Martin Luther King Jr. biography. King is dead. So was that not a good book because he didn't get King? No, it's fantastic. It's that's the norm.
What were some unique challenges for you in researching and reporting this book?
Well, it's a different era, so a lot of the people that you need to talk to, unfortunately, have passed away, or they are very much older, and their memory is lacking. So I think that was a struggle. A lot of people passed away after I had interviewed them, so I think that was a unique struggle. Just learning. I wanted this book to be very informative about Islam and Nigeria, and just reading as much as I could. I mean, most of what I read for this project had nothing to do with basketball.
And there's a moment late in the book where Hakeem is. I think he's on the doorstep of retiring or thereabouts, and he asks himself this question. But I think whoever he was speaking to, he's like, "Did you give it your all, or did you give it all you had?" I really just like that as a framing question and as a general sense of ethic. And I wonder, like for you, like when you hear something like that, especially when you try to pour so much of yourself into the work at hand, that do you when you're done with a book, are you asking yourself that question, like, did I give it everything I had?
Yeah, all the time. Every story I do, every book, it's very much, and it's not even asking it because you do it. Like it's just writing is like a physical act. Like I am exhausted when I turn in a story, let alone a book. I give everything. Like this is not just a job like this is not just a career. Like this is my passion. This is my life. So, I very much think of it in those same terms.
And granted, you're getting a chance to sort of reacquaint yourself with your own book and Hakeem, but in the time that you were maybe away from it, that necessary time away, and even projecting a couple months ahead, do you find yourself ever like missing Hakeem and working with him every day, so to speak?
No. I I'm already on to the next project, and I had so many stories for Ringer that like I just can't afford to like think back. I feel like every day there's so many things to do and I'm always behind. And so I just never no, yeah, no. It was really nice because this time I didn't do the audiobook. I I did an essay that is original and you can only find in the audiobook, and then I did the prologue. So I narrated those things, but I got a voice actor who's fantastic to do this book. And that was really nice for me because I didn't have to live the book again. I could just leave it.
Let's see, and I guess just a couple more things, Mirin. What would you identify maybe as a crucial lesson that maybe you learned from book one that helped you to book two?
Just how to do the damn thing. I did not know anything about how to do a book. Nobody does till you do your first book. And I just learned how to balance the reporting and writing. That is really because people don't understand it. You're not just sitting and writing a book. You're literally interviewing hundreds of people before you can even think about writing a book.
Uh-oh.
It's like two different processes. It's just knowing how to do it is just what I learned. I know that's very vague, but The other thing I learned is just urgency. These people are getting older. You want to interview as many people as possible. You know, Bill Walton, Jerry West, so many people that I interviewed passed away after I had gotten their testimony, and it just, I don't know, it's made me feel an urgency to tell these stories more quickly.
Very nice. Well, Mirin, it's always wonderful getting a chance to talk some shop, and of course, celebrate your wonderful book. So, just I want to thank you so much for carving out some time to come on the show and talk shop and celebrate Hakeem Olajuwon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Nice, awesome, yes. Hey, thanks to Mirin for coming back on the show. Good stuff. Name of the book again is Dream: The Life and Legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon. Go buy it for the sports biography lover in your life, the basketball lover in your life, maybe someone who needs a good kick in the ass. Okay, so I don't know if you noticed or not, but I definitely did in the edit. When I asked Mirin about this idea of exploitation in biography or feature writing, whatever, I noticed a significant change in energy, and I really feel like I had offended Mirin, that I was accusing her of being exploitative of people. It's something I've deeply wrestled with in my reporting of the Prefontaine book, and that's the ethos of that question. And I corresponded with Mirin apologizing that I had offended her, and she assured me that I did not. So that's where this parting shot comes from. And I originally had this in the introduction because before I had heard back from Mirin, I had assumed, until I heard otherwise, that I did offend her. And so this was kind of my case of what I meant in clarification. So in any case, that's where this comes from, and how journalists tell other people's stories for personal gain. It's a thing I've wrestled with for 20 years and still wrestle with. Like, who the hell am I to earn attention or even a happy buck by writing about somebody else? Yeah, I was accused of this during my reporting several times. I think she might have thought I was accusing her of being exploitative, which wasn't my intent at all. When I'm troubled by something, and I've been troubled by this for 2 years, I often ask my guests about it. It helps me, but I think it also helps the community, and have smart people talk about those kind of issues, right? And so, is Jeff Pearlman exploiting Bo Jackson by writing a biography on him? Is Ian O'Connor exploiting Aaron Rodgers? David Marinus with Jim Thorpe, Vince Lombardi, or Roberto Clemente? Or Madeline Blaze with Alice Marble? Or Kai Bird with Robert Oppenheimer? Or Robert Caro with Lyndon Johnson? Or me with Prefontaine? As Howard Bryant, biographer of Hank Aaron and Ricky Henderson, said on this podcast, the stories we remember are the ones that get repeated. So it's on the journalist to dive into the archives and make hundreds of phone calls to round out a life, keep that heart beating. Journalists are the life support for certain icons. Without the storytellers, life very much goes on, and people will forget. As Madeline Blaze said, biography is kind of the most brazen genre because we seek to resurrect lives. After I was done in the edit for this particular episode, I emailed Mirin saying I was sorry for offending her and explained why I like to ask smart people about this topic. And it really is a topic, and I'm not so sure how well it's aged, but I think it's aged all right. It's a topic that Janet Malcolm made famous in her book, The Journalist and the Murderer. Her opening graph is a savage indictment of her own trade. Here it is. Every journalist who is not too stupid or too full of himself to notice what is going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible. He is a kind of confidence man, preying on people's vanity, ignorance, or loneliness, gaining their trust and betraying them without remorse. Like the credulous widow who wakes up one day to find the charming young man and all her savings gone. So the consenting subject of a piece of nonfiction writing learns, when the article or book appears, his hard lesson. Journalists justify their treachery in various ways according to their temperaments. The more pompous talk about freedom of speech and the public's right to know. The least talented talk about art. The seemliest murmur about earning a living. Call me seemly. People ask me for money to talk about Steve Prefontaine, and I say can't do that. Or asked if I planned on giving any dollar I made from the book to the Prefontaine Foundation. And it gives you an idea that many people view journalists as leeches. They don't see it as a job. They don't see it as work. They see us reporters as vermin picking through the trash. I've been accused of it a number of times. So anyway, thankfully, I did hear from Mirin like 10 o'clock my time, night before this was supposed to publish, and I usually set it to publish at 3 a.m. local time, so it goes 6 a.m. on the East Coast. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to table the publication. I'm going to retrack my intro. I'm going to reshape this parting shot so it makes more sense and put it to the end of the show versus the beginning. So it's just one of those deals. I think we're cool. She assured me I did not offend her. It felt like I did. It definitely felt like I did. And that was not the case. And there you go. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can do, interview. See ya.